and a very, very hearty welcome to everybody from around the globe. It's always just such magical time this when we open up the screen and see people popping in from Poland and New Delhi and South Africa and Botswana and Zimbabwe and Iceland. It really is extraordinary, and it makes us feel very, 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 very good to have you all around the screen. As I mentioned earlier, I'm on a real high today because things are looking up for me. I broke my arm and I can now use my hand, look. So that's a very good thing. And the most important thing is that I'll be catching an aeroplane next on the 15th of July, and I'll be joining Osnat and seeing her in Seattle. And then the two of us are going to go down and visit Jan. And I'm pretty sure that there are going to be some very interesting things that are going to pop up. I'm not too sure what, but with regard to the future of the Pass It On network. Because there's so many of you that are basically new to our network, just a few words. Firstly, our network was founded by Jan Hively and myself in 2013, and it's grown ever since. And we're very proud of the fact that we have people in 65 different countries, and we're not a basic membership organization per se. But what we do have is we link up people who have their own organizations, and they come to us like a well to come and dip in and cross-pollinate with their people from around the world. And this is the most fascinating thing, is to see how problems are handled elsewhere in the world, because the phenomenon that we're dealing with here is a global phenomenon, and it's been experienced right throughout the world. So our idea with Pass It On is to pass it on, find out what's happening elsewhere, and see what we can do to make things as good and as possible. So if you're not yet on our mailing lists, I would like to invite you to do so. We have a gazette, which is more or less monthly. Sometimes it's every 2 months, depending on a couple of things. But we have these monthly 50-50 conversations, and we'd really like you to be part of our community. We don't ask you to pay a membership fee. There is the possibility of donating some money, which will help us to pay our bills, but that's it. So our Pass It On network, you'll get the recording and all relevant information if you wish to go further. And now I'd just like to hand over to Osnat to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Thank you, Moira. I actually want to set context to what we're going to be talking about tonight, this morning, this evening, midday. In a collectivistic cultures, taking care of elderly family member is a strong expectation. For example, it's common in parts of Asia to see multi-generational households where adult children are expected to live with or near their parents and help them as they age. And then there's the solo ager. The solo ager refers to someone who ages without the support of family members. This term, as we found out, does not have a direct translation in most other languages. Yet, many countries might have terms that focus primarily on the social isolation aspect of solo aging, but not necessarily as it applies to older adults. Pass It On Network, you might have seen it in the invitation, conducted an informal survey among our global pioneers and reached the same conclusion. But solo aging becomes more recognized issue around the world. New terms like solo aging are likely to emerge and capture the specific needs of this population. So beyond social isolation, solo agers face a unique set of challenges. For example, financial security, or physical and mental health, or decision-making and advocacy, or emotional well-being, not to mention housing and personal safety. So these challenges may be different depending on the person's age, their social connections, their personal resilience, and even their gender. We know it's proven that women live longer than men, and are more likely to be solo agers. And so, to help us understand these unique considerations and develop a better support system and resources for solo agers, maybe ourselves too, we invited Sara Zeff Geber, PhD, who coined the term solo ager and is the foremost authority on the subject. Let me introduce you to Sara. First of all, welcome, Sara. And she's an author and a speaker. As I said, coined the term solo ager for those aging without children or support or familial support. With over a decade of advocacy, she focuses on their unique needs and emphasizes proactive planning. Her book, which we should all read, it's being translated to other languages now, Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, was praised by the Wall Street Journal as a top book on aging well. Sara is also a contributor to Forbes.com, a fellow at Nexus Insights, and an active member of various aging and retirement organizations. Though married, she identifies herself as a solo ager, and she lives in Sonoma County in California. And with that, I would like to pass it on to Sara. But Sara, I have a question for you before you start, is how did you become interested in solo aging? How come that no one in the world is as interested in solo aging as you are?
Well, that's changing, fortunately. There are other people who are very interested in solo aging now. But the epiphany for me came when I was just out simply having a glass of wine with a friend of mine. And she had been kind of scarce in my life. I was used to seeing her once a month or so. And so I said, Sandy, where have you been? And she said, well, I've been flying back and forth between California and Maryland on the East Coast of the US, trying to help her aging mother, help her settle into a place where she'd be safe and secure and have companionship. Her father had passed away a few years before, and that she had to do a lot of other kinds of tasks for her mother, like helping her downsize and helping her sell the home she had been living in for 40 years. So it was taking a lot of her time, and she was flying back and forth across the country very frequently to do that. So I haven't seen much of her. And I know enough about Sandy to know that she doesn't have children, and I don't have children. And I looked at her at one point and I said, Sandy, who's going to do all that for us? And of course, there was really no answer to that. And that was about 10 years ago now. And I started looking into solo aging. And I hadn't even come up with a term for it yet, but I was looking at people who don't have children and what they do, both in this country and around the world. And I found very, very little in the literature. So anyway, that's kind of how I got started on it.
Yeah, well, we're all lucky that you did. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more. I think you have a lot more to say. I read your book, so let's help all of us, please.
Good. Okay, so I do have a lot more to say, and I have some slides that go with that I think are kind of reinforce some of the points that I want to make. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. All right. I've sort of already told you about my journey toward discovery of what we know about solo aging so far, and it really is a journey. I look at it as a journey filled with questions, and we all have different questions about where we're going in this life that come up throughout our lifetime, but certainly toward the end of our lives, we look at that again and say, where are we headed, and who might be there to join us on this quest? So what I did find when I went to the literature, and I want to say once again that this is very US centric, so I hope it will be of interest to those of you around the world. You may or may not be sharing some of the same challenges that we are in this country, but prior to about the last 5 years, there was absolutely no research that had been done on solo agers per se. Now, here is a piece of research that an organization in the US called the Pew Research Center, pretty well-known research organization. This is a study they did back in 2010, based on what they knew as of about 2008 of what was happening with regard to childbearing. And what they discovered was pretty dramatic, in that baby boomer women, those are women born between 1946 and 1964. Baby boomer women had children at a far lower rate than all of previous generations of women. Previous generations of women had about 90% of them had kids, so the childless rate was about 10% throughout history that we know of, at least in the US. That zoomed up to close to 20%, either choosing or by circumstance not being able to have children by the year 2008. And we tie this to the baby boom generation because there was a lot going on in the baby boom generation when they were in their, I'm part of that, were in our 20s, late teens and 20s. First of all, we had the pill. We had the birth control pill. And that happened in 1964. And the baby boom generation was really the first generation to be able to take advantage of that. In addition, we didn't have as much pressure as our mothers and our grandmothers did to bear and have children. The other big thing that was going on in the US is that because of pressure from the women's movement and women's liberation, a lot of doors were opening up to women that had never been opened before. Doors to prestigious universities and colleges, doors to industry that had been the purview just of men for so many years. So the upshot of that is that women, for the first time, did not need a man in their life to take care of them. So many women opted to not have a marriage, did not get married. And a lot of women also chose not to have children because there was less pressure than their mothers had had to do that. So all of those things were kind of a sea change in the US anyway, during the late 60s and throughout the 70s. Well, fast forward to 2021, and the US Census Bureau, who does a study every 10 years to see what's going on in our population, what kinds of demographics are changing, what are the numbers looking like. They do that study every 10 years, and then they commission a lot of organizations to look at this data and make some conclusions about what are the pressures that are happening around the country. What are the changes? What are the demographic changes that are going on? Well, one of the studies that they commissioned in 2021 was to look at how many childless older adults there are in the US. And this is what they found. They found that the oldest adults at that point, who were over 74, those are not baby boomers. Those are people who were born before 1946. Were far, far lower than both the early boomers, those that were at that point age 65 to 74, and way lower than the later boomers who were at that point age 55 to 64. So it reinforced what the Pew Research had confirmed 15 years prior. So we know now that there are those forces going on, and it reinforced for me, I was thrilled that they did this because it reinforced for me that solo aging is something that is really important for us to look at. Because if, like myself, choosing not to have children has ramifications as I get older. And whether I or other women chose not to have children or by circumstance couldn't have children, it leads to some very, very important decisions to be made later in life. So, but I do want to reiterate too that solo aging, as I define it, goes beyond childless. And I actually came to this conclusion because so many women who came to my talks about solo aging said, you know, it's not just childless women who are solo agers, but there are women who have children, but they live very, very far away. They have a family that's dysfunctional in some way, or they're estranged. It's quite shocking how many people are actually estranged from their adult children at this point in life for various reasons. Sometimes the children are not fully functional. You've probably read about the percentage of people who are actually raising their grandchildren because their own children are not functional enough to do that for various reasons. And then there are people who simply live alone. They have no spouse or partner. Or they, again, have no children. So all of these are categories of potential solo agers. So when we add up all these categories, in the US, we're looking at something in the 30, 32, 34% of the older population. Now, one of the ways that I also conceived of the differences is looking at the networks. And I think social networks are a particularly important issue for solo agers. And if you look at a social network of a parent whose children, grown adult children, live not far away, and they are raising children of their own. So you have a robust network of children and grandchildren, and then the older adults, the parents in this diagram, have lots of access to various family members. Now, they also have access to their community and friends and their siblings, but the strongest ties are to their adult children and their grandchildren. And that's, but sometimes their children's friends get involved, and then of course their children get married and their in-laws. So you can see it can grow organically just from having been spawned by the parents, or in some cases just one parent. Contrast that with the social network of a solo ager, and it's much more skeletal, if you will. Solo agers tend to have stronger ties to their community, maybe their siblings if they live nearby, and certainly to their friends. And when I talk to solo agers around the country, I hear from them that they have kind of family of choice, people in their lives who have been in their lives maybe for a long time, and they rely on them. They rely on them for many of the same things that people with a robust family system would rely on family members for. However, as we get older, some of those social networks can break down because of physical and emotional, mental needs of the older adults involved. Also, one of the risks of being a solo ager and having a network made up mostly of friends and other people in the community is that often they are contemporaries. In other words, they're of the same age. So in a sense, you really don't know who is going to need help, who's going to need someone to be there to support them as they get older. We don't know who that's going to happen to, and if their entire social network is people of their own age, that's kind of a scary proposition. Now, as I'm sure preaching to the choir here to tell you what the research says about getting older for all of us, that social support is key, that relationships become much more important than any status of income or where you live. And aging in the right place can be a real key to happiness and satisfaction later in life. So I do a lot of workshops with solo agers, helping them make plans for the future. And one of the things I really try and impress strongly is that living alone is a recipe for isolation and vulnerability. I really believe that. I'm very much in favor of, there's a movement here called home sharing, and it's growing. More and more people are starting to open up their homes to other people. Many people have homes that are, especially of the baby boom generation, homes that are larger than they need, and they can share those with contemporaries or with young people. Any way to avoid living alone as you get older, I think is a step in the right direction. Having said that, there are different kinds of loneliness, and I wish I had a dollar for every time someone has said to me, I love living alone. I love my solo life. I'm happy this way. Well, yes, but things can change as we get older. And sometimes it's sometimes we are challenged in different areas of aloneness. So these are different ways that people can feel alone. And when we look at that in a more immediate way, we look at our hierarchy of connections. And this is something that solo agers should look at very strongly, because again, they don't have the family support often. Now, sometimes they do. I have one friend, I've known her since we were both in high school together, and she did not marry or have children. She was a scientist, she lived in the Galapagos Islands for about 13 years and now lives back in the US. But has four older sisters, all of whom did get married and have children. And those children are my friend Linda's nieces and nephews, and she's very close to them. So I call her the solo ager that isn't, because really the whole definition of solo ager is based on not having the family support. Now, this woman, my friend Linda, does have family support. Her nieces and nephews adore her. She took them all to the Galapagos at one point or another when she was living there, and they respect and adore her. And I know for sure, and she knows for sure, that they will help her as she gets older, whatever she needs, whether she needs someplace more supportive to live, or she needs help brought into her home, or she needs to move to a supportive community. They will help her do that. They will make sure that her needs are met. And that's the kind of support that we all need as we get older. We all need, in my opinion, we all need to know that there's going to be someone there that will help make decisions, help us physically cope with life in a way that we never had to when we were younger. Maybe we will be, maybe our mobility will be hampered. Maybe we'll take a fall and we'll break a bone. Moira was just telling us about her bone break. So it's not so easy as you get older. I remember breaking a bone when I was 18. I broke an ankle skiing. Put a cast on it 2 or 3, well, I guess it was more like 6 weeks later, I was just fine. Well, as we get older, we don't bounce back quite as quickly, and we may need some additional help other than a set of crutches. So all of these issues do happen to all of us at some point in our lives as we are aging. So the way I demonstrate to solo agers the kinds of support system that is helpful in later life, the kind of support system that they will need, is to look at the kind of the constellation of people that they're surrounded by. And we all have a constellation of people in our lives like this throughout life. But as we get older, some of these bubbles tend to either disappear or shrink. Now, I'm making them disappear on this chart, but often they don't totally disappear, they shrink. And the one thing that I like to encourage people to try and avoid is this picture, where the strongest relationships you have, most of your entire support system is doctors and paid caregivers. I'd much rather see, for myself anyway, a support system that looks more like this, so that I'm relying on my friends and the community to be part of my support system. Yes, there'll be doctors and other caregivers potentially. There may be some families still around, but I want my friends and my community to still be in my life. As I did my own research into what solo agers need, one of the most helpful elements of that was, and one of the most helpful kind of inquiries that I made is, what do adult children typically help their aging parents with? And these are the categories of things that I came up with. These are the things that I observe adult children doing on a regular basis for their parents who are in anywhere from their late 70s into their 80s, 90s, and into their hundreds, because we know people are living longer, and women do typically live longer than men. I did some of this research by going into retirement communities and asking people about the kinds of decisions they have to make, about the kinds of things that they have to somehow continue to do, like pay their bills. And very often that task falls to an adult child, or they get help from an adult child. And this is really no matter where they live. Even people who are living in very supportive retirement communities are still getting help from their adult children in many cases. So this is something that solo agers need to take into consideration as they plan for their own future. I have one friend that gave me one of the most interesting stories that kind of supported a lot of this. She and her husband lived in the Los Angeles area, and they moved into a new home, and they threw a party for themselves, and they invited all their neighbors. And there was a couple who attended their party, and this couple was in their mid-80s at the time, and they lived 2 or 3 doors down. And they came to the party, and they stayed pretty late, and they started getting to know my friends, Andrea and Peter. And then they started to socialize with them some, because this older couple, Fred and Hildy, were still in pretty independent shape. They were going out. They were actually doing some entertaining of their own still. But as the years went by, they started asking Andrea and Peter for help with different things. And Andrea and Peter were thrilled to do it. They were happy to help. They were very kind people. And so at one point, Fred had to go into the hospital for some surgery, and they asked Andrea and Peter if they would mind keeping an eye on Hildy and maybe even spending one night with her, because they had never spent a night apart, and Hildy was scared. So I think Andrea went over that first night, but Fred didn't come out of the hospital the next day. He developed sepsis and ended up staying in the hospital for 10 days. And Andrea and Peter ended up taking care of Hildy. And they discovered doing that Hildy had started to become very forgetful. So they were helping her with a number of different brain-related activities as well as physical. And at that point, she was also in a wheelchair. So Fred recovered and got out of the hospital and came back home, but it was really a wake-up call for him. And shortly thereafter, he asked Andrea and Peter to have their power of attorney and to be on their advance directive, which is in the US, the piece of paper that lets medical professionals know what is wanted later in life, who's going to make medical decisions for them. So Andrea and Peter became their medical spokespeople. They had their financial power of attorney, which meant they were helping pay the bills. They were actually managing Fred and Hildy's funds. And they weren't related. They just lived down the street. So time went on, and eventually Fred and Hildy did pass on. Fred first and Hildy very shortly thereafter, and Andrea and Peter were there making all the arrangements and handling everything for them. Now, the point of telling you the story is that Fred and Hildy, turns out, were solo agers. They had no children, and they had no apparent family that ever showed up in the process of all of this. But they got very, very lucky meeting Andrea and Peter. I don't think we can all plan on being that lucky. And if we are solo agers like Fred and Hildy, we need to make some plans to have backup on some of these tasks that we all have to perform. So in my opinion, and as I have done my own observational research in the last 10 years, part of the answer to how to have a safe and secure life as a solo ager is to choose the right place to age. And to ask yourself the question, does your current environment give you the best support for your physical and mental health? Does it do that? Lots of people in the US believe and want they believe in it and want to do it, to age in place. Age in place, age, and if that means aging in the 2 or 3 story home that they have lived in for the last 40 years, sometimes I think that's a really bad answer. So, does it mean you have to move to a retirement community? Not necessarily. There are other choices. Here within the US, we have a number of choices that people can make. Some of them, I'm sure, translate to other cultures as well. Obviously, one option is to move into a retirement community. Another option is to live with family. We have something called intentional communities. I think those are very popular in Western Europe as well. We call them co-housing communities often here. Those are good choices. Any kind of choice that doesn't isolate you, in my opinion, is a good choice for a solo ager. I haven't talked at all about the fact of having a partner, and I have had to argue this point quite a bit with people and saying that even people who are married should consider themselves solo agers if they don't have children. And I am married. My husband and I, of course, have no idea which of us is going to die first. One of us will, though, unless we get hit by the same bus on the same day. And the other one is going to be left as a true solo ager, all alone. And that is, especially if you have had a spouse all of your life and you haven't learned to be as independent as you might, that goes for men or women, that can be a pretty scary proposition. So thinking about being a solo ager, even though you may have a partner or a spouse now, is pretty important too. And then finally, I'd like to try and put a pin in the bubble or pin in the balloon of people who are engaging in what I call magical thinking. That they're going to live healthfully and happily until they suddenly die in their sleep at age of 95 after a fabulous day on the golf course or the pickleball court or whatever activity they enjoy, and poof, they're gone. Well, some people do get lucky and that's how they go. I'm not so sure I would absolutely call that lucky, because I think I'd want to have time to say some goodbyes before it's my turn to leave the planet. But I think that people who believe that this is going to happen to them are engaging in magical thinking, because 70% of us are not going to go this way. We're going to have some time when we are more frail, times when we are less capable of managing our life the way we have all of our early life. So doing some planning for death, planning for caregiving is an important part of life. And that brings me to just a picture of my book. And I hope at this point that we can have some good discussion at this point and come back and join the rest of you.
Surprise, surprise, no breakup groups today, because you know what? There's so much stuff happening in the chat. We're going to go straight into conversation, but two things. First, thank you, Sarah, for lubricating the thinking wheels here. And I would like to offer just a reflection here for all of you, is whether you're solo ager or not, whether you know other people who are, according to the definition we just learned today, what does your support network look like? So let's just take a pause here and just think for yourself what is in your life as you're looking into the future. And once you have it cemented in your mind, we have some questions and some insights in the chat, and I invite these people to also share it aloud if they want. We have a digital hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's called Raise Hand, and if you click on it, the little digital hand will show up. There are many of us here today, so it will be easier to see who you are when you do this. And in fact, Himanshu is the first person, and then Vijay.
First of all, thank you, Sarah, for your very well documented presentation. I have few reservations about all this. To begin with, in today's world, when almost all of us are busy with our cell phones, we hardly ever look up from the cell phone to communicate with another human being, even if we are married for last 50, 60 years. Forget about children. We all internalize everything within ourselves. So it's rather awkward in today's world to talk about being alone. When dependence on other person is like hardly any of any importance today. One, children are no guarantee for not being alone. Number one. Number two, even if children are around you, they are not there emotionally there for you. They're there for practical reasons. Maybe financial support, maybe physical support. But end of the day, they are not there. And it's true around the world, whichever country you live in. So these are my basic observations, number one. Number two, this is not about women alone. It applies to men and women both. So in your initial slides, when you're talking about numbers, 8.4 million and whatever numbers, even if 60% are women, 40% are still men. So solo aging cannot be just about women. So that's my point. Thank you.
Well, Snap, do you mind if I respond?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I never intended this to be just about women. And it certainly is not just about women. On the other hand, when I do my talks on solo aging, the women outnumber the men who attend the talks. I would say generously 10-1. Maybe it's more like 15-1. I would love to see more interest from men. There is one man, there are a number of people talking about aging, talking about solo aging today, and there is one man, Jackson Rayner, out of Atlanta, Georgia in the US, who is talking specifically about men, and I'm thrilled at that. He and I were on a panel together for American Society on Aging about a year and a half ago. So absolutely, it is absolutely about men too. Yes, women are most often the ones left alone because of the mortality age gap, but you're so right. You're so right. It's about men as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Vijay, and then Susan.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this brilliant and well-documented expose. I'm speaking from Mauritius. At the moment, like it is everywhere in the world, people are living longer, and women, for that matter, are living longer. And our what we call a extended family system is breaking, which means that whether there are two parents or one parent, one day or the other, the decision is taken to place them in homes. And as you said, very often one would go first. If they were married, one would go first. And then that person would find himself alone in a home, which they do not culturally, they do not consider a home for retirement. They do not consider it as a home, because I would say in French, it is where they have been living for 70 years or 60 years or whatever, was their patrimoine, I would say in French. That is what they have achieved through working hard, buying land, constructing a house, and at this age, they wouldn't, for any matter, for any price, leave that place to go in a home. Then they stay alone, and there rises the problematics that you have been talking about. So I will end here because there will be many other people who will be speaking. So thank you. This is what I wanted to contribute. Yes, that question of financial support, which considers very often LGBTQI plus people who are not married, who have not been working, and women who have not been working find themselves in very dire need of financing when they grow old. Thank you. Thank you.
Susan, and then Hans.
I just wanted to respond a little bit. I'm in the United States. I do have friends from all over the world, although we don't really talk a lot about aging. We talk about many other things, but I think that this question about loneliness and isolation is it's dangerous to make assumptions and to make generalizations. I live in a very suburban, micro metropolitan area, and the experience among myself, many of my colleagues, my friends, is not isolation and loneliness due to technology. In fact, it's more that a lot of people have been unplugging, including very young people. It shocks me at how unfamiliar many high school and college students are with technology. They're just not familiar with it, can't use it, need to be taught. And I find that the way of life in many other areas across the United States is not that way. So I think that's also something for people to be aware of, and particularly if you're thinking about the right place to live as you age. So it may be that if you are, no matter what age you are, lonely and isolated, maybe you're in the wrong community. Maybe you're living in the wrong place. if you don't want that. But I think we need to realize that there are places that are not like that. And so there are options.
Thank you, Susan. Sarah, do you have any comments about that?
No, I think I want to wait and see what others have to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't manage to unmute. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for this very interesting, shall we say, giving us a side into the solo aging issues. There are 2 points I would like to mention. And one thing is this difference between men and women. It's very interesting. I have been working for now more than 10 years, 10, 12 years for the University of the Third Age in Reykjavik. And as you know, University of the Third Age is an international organization, an international phenomenon. And we have been from the beginning, from 50 persons engaged up to now 1,400, we are seeing 80% of our members are women. And we have been thinking a little bit about it. What is the difference? Why don't we get men? We are having lectures, weekly lectures on interesting, what we find interesting concepts and issues. And it's if we have some engineer that is talking about some technological or issues, then we get maybe 20% women, 20% men listening. But on the general, we are seeing 80% out of people women. And there is, I guess, the social contact, the social issues that you need to encourage people to find, and you have to offer some of it. But it seems to me, I sometimes joke about it, that women are much more socially intelligent than men. But maybe I'm wrong. It's just a question of how are we to reach both men and women. It would be very interesting to hear if there are any differences when in the solo aging issues, statistics regarding men and women. Another thing, the second thing I wanted to raise, I saw that some of you put this in the comment about intergenerational issues. I have the feeling that there is a lot of tendency to isolate people our age in communities that are okay. We are seeing each other. We are seeing people our own age with maybe similar interest, etc. But we would not see the younger people. So how are we? I would not be happy to live in a community where I only see people aged 65 to 100 or whatever. I would like to live in a community where I see people from, let's say, grown people from 20 to whatever, 100, 120 or whatever it will be in the future. I don't want to be locked in into a sort of a community, maybe some walls around, so we can be kept there, kept quiet, and are not to bother the society otherwise. So intergenerational thing is I think very interesting, and it would be interesting to hear a little bit about how can we shall we say, help the solo aging by intergenerational mixture of some kind. Thank you.
Thank you,
I will respond to that, because I think, Hans, you've hit on something that's very popular now, and is certainly being recognized by the people in the field of aging, that intergenerational relationships are important to people. They're important to older people, they're important to younger people. And the more we become an isolated society, the more people are realizing that it's an important issue. So there are companies out there today. One company used to be called Upside Home. They're now just called Upside, I think. They are setting up communities. They started in Florida, setting up communities, buildings, in fact, where they are inviting older adults to be renters. They're inviting younger people to be renters, and there is active, encouraged sharing of resources, of knowledge, of help, kind of cross-pollination. It doesn't go unnoticed by people who run retirement communities that people want an active intergenerational life. So even in the retirement communities that some people would look at as, well, you're locked up in them and you never see any younger people. That's not the case in most of them anymore. They're involved in sometimes co-located on college campuses, often involved in tutoring, often involved in mentoring. So there's a lot of encouragement of cross-pollination, even in the retirement communities, cross-pollination with intergenerational influences. So I totally agree with you, and I see a lot of that going on, and I definitely applaud it when I see it. And I think you'll see more and more of it, at least in the US. I don't know. Again, I'm very ignorant when it comes to what's going on in other countries. So this is absolutely fascinating to me. I love this opportunity to hear from you all.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we get to Valerie, Tom McCormick, you put some interesting noted in the chat. I think we answered some of them, but you have a request for Sarah and maybe for anybody else to comment on how significant or involved are the various faith communities with solo agers. Sarah, you may or may not have the answer, but maybe other people have. And think about it. And in the meantime, we'll go to Valerie.
Well, you don't want me to respond to that now?
Yeah, go ahead, and we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Valerie.
Yeah, I think faith communities are a great place to start with getting involved with solo agers, because they all have solo agers as part of their congregants. It's happening. To what extent it's happening, I couldn't tell you. I haven't done a study of that, but I think one of the problems is that faith-based communities are far less, they're less prevalent in our communities. I know that's extremely true in Northern Europe, that they're very much not a part of community life anymore. They're having somewhat of a resurgence in the US. And so I know that some attention is being paid to solo agers, especially in some New York communities. There's a very active Jewish network in New York supporting solo agers, of which there are many in New York City particularly. So I'd love to hear from others about that too.
I was trying to unmute in the wrong place. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I had an exciting time last week. I was 83. I know, 83 and living alone in a tiny village in the middle of the Brecon Beacons National Park with no transport. I drive and I did start thinking, what am I going to do when I need support? My family live on 3 continents in 7 countries. Only one, my grandson Adam, lives in Cardiff, and that's 2 hours drive away. So what am I going to do? Well, first of all, when I can no longer drive, I can take taxis because I won't have the expense of running the car. You can find ways of doing things. You can use the technology. You can have your food delivered. All of these technological things are available to us all in the ways we want to use them. I do Zoom meetings. I just spent 2 months in Uganda, which was very interesting. And I even at one stage thought, could I live here? Certainly the cost of living was a lot less in Uganda. But then I looked at it and I thought, Val, at your age, and you're used to the National Health Service, which we have in UK, I think I need to be where the National Health Service is. I've nearly died 7 times, so I've certainly used my money's worth out of the National Health. I think you need a plan. My plan is developing, so I can't really tell you what the plan is yet. But at the end of the day, I will carry on for the time being doing what I love doing, which is intergenerational learning. When I first started talking about intergenerational learning 20 odd years ago, people said, what do you mean? What does it mean, intergenerational learning? And I said, it means doing what we always did do. We always learned from our elders. And we can still go on doing that. And we can use the technology. Going to Uganda cost me a lot of money, and I wasn't able to be in contact with many people that I would have liked to be in contact with. I wasn't allowed to go to the refugee camp without written permission beforehand, and there wasn't time to organise that. So we've now decided that we're going to use the technology. Instead of my going to places, which I did enjoy enormously, I've been to so many countries, I've forgotten some of them, we can use the technology. As older people, it's a wonderful tool to be able to talk to people in Uganda all over the country, not just in the city where I was based. You see? So older people relish the technology and relish your life because you're dead for a long time.
Well, thank you, Valerie.
I hope not too soon.
Thank you, Valerie. That's a lot of wisdom. Kim, you've been waiting so patiently, and then Jen.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm here from Canada. I didn't have an opportunity to add the extra thing here. I'm here from the East Coast, Canada, Nova Scotia. So I was just listening to Hans's comment there about men and how, you know, the majority of women tend to be in the sessions. And I remember back in the day, I'm retired now. I've been retired since last January. And I remember back in the day when I would go to workshops at work, and would usually be the majority would be women. And there was one workshop I was at that was for procrastination, and we seemed to have more men in that one. And we kind of talked about sort of this whole perception of vulnerability that with this whole toughness myth that we have around men. And so I think what would really make a difference there is for other men to, you know, try to draw other men in to find creative ways to get other men to be part of these things. Because I often think about, like, for example, with my husband, he's from Ireland originally. And, you know, I'm basically it for him. And I think, like, if I were to pass away, who would he have, you know? And I know with myself, talking about the whole church connection and that sort of a thing, church had been a big part of my life for a long time. But I'm finding with the current church that I'm part of, there's a lot of ageism going on now. Like almost every week, there's some sort of comment from the pulpit about, you know, older people and that sort of thing. And we're really tying into a lot of the social media kind of okay boomer thing and all this kind of thing that's creating this divide between the generations. And it's just causing this whole sentiment in society in general to, you know, kind of look down on aged people. And as we've said, like, you know, those of us from the boomer generation, you know, maybe we're hippies or whatever, but it's like we always knew that we kind of built on a foundation that existed already. And now it's kind of like, you know, kids can live and die and never have to interact with anyone outside of their own demographic. I do have a daughter. She lives in Toronto, which is several 1,000 miles away from me. And, you know, I don't really know, like, you know, she's a great kid, but I was a caregiver for my mom who has dementia and is now in a nursing home. And I think of all of the scope of things that I had to do for her and still am doing. will she want to do any of those kinds of things? I really don't know. So anyway, just the whole point that someone made about the emotional connection is very important too. I'm currently part of a social group now, just recently joined on Facebook actually, and we have like social events. It's seniors, but as we say, not kind of having that same connection with a younger demographic. You wonder, like, what's that going to look like in the future should my husband pass away? And then, and I'm an only child as well, so I don't have any siblings or anything. So.
Yeah, that sounds, Kim, like it echoes the situations a lot of people that I know, including myself. And yeah, it underscores what Sara was saying. You got to plan, you got to think about it while you can still think. Yeah.
Hi, I'm also from Canada, and thank you Sara, for your wonderful presentation. And I have read some of your work. And it's really valuable and needed, I think. I wanted to comment on two things that came up with Mr. Goodmanson and I can't remember who else. One of them is, I'm kind of a solo ager in that my husband passed away 3 years ago. We had one child who is in Massachusetts, which is several thousand miles away. And so I'm basically on my own. I decided after my husband passed away that I would take on the leadership of a local seniors group that needed a leader because it was there, had been there for 3 years, but they didn't have anyone to lead it that year. And since my husband passed from cancer, and I really wanted to help other seniors not end up the way he did. It's a terrible way to end your life and to have your life end. So I led discussions on the various things you need to do to live your aging life as healthy as possible. And that included things like how to keep driving longer, more safely, how to plan for medications and illnesses and things like that. So we tried to go over a number of those kinds of things. Just in the course of all that, several of the people in the group said that this group was very, very important to them because this wasn't all the group, but it was a few. It was the only way they could get out of the house and meet other people in the neighborhood who were also going through some of the same things that they were. So it was an extremely important resource for them. And I don't think that can be underscored. If you can develop a neighborhood group that becomes each other's support group, it's just invaluable. The other thing is, as a part of this group, it was part of a neighborhood larger group, which is called a community league, which does most of its work is with children and young families. And I was one of the people that pushed to have more inclusion of older people, because we all have, anybody who's over 60 has probably felt ageism, and there's a lot of it in Canada. Anyway, so we decided to start an intergenerational walk. So it was actually there was an interest in young moms wanting to go for a regular walk with one another, and there was an interest in older people wanting to go for a walk with one another in the summers. And it worked out really well for the summer, but then often the mothers became too busy in the fall. They went back to work or whatever, and the older people couldn't really always go out in the winter, so it kind of fell apart. It only lasted one summer. So some intergenerational things can be difficult, and it's a challenge to start it, but I think it's extremely worthwhile. I think that giving young people the chance to meet real old people, so that when they see those people somewhere, they don't think, oh yeah, another old person. They think, oh, that's so-and-so, and this is such and such. And it's a totally different thing. We did one other experience when we finished the year this year, which happened in June. We had an event we called Celebrate a Senior, and I invited the community to bring a senior they knew to this event, and we would show things about our lives that just tell something interesting about ourselves. Well, hardly anybody came. I mean, a lot of our group were there and ready and willing, and some of the best bakers were there with some of their wonderful goodies, and we underestimate the skill involved in that. And so that's something else I really encouraged. But there were enough people that they felt that they enjoyed the time, and the people who did come, including the children, had a good time. And one of our older people, her husband used to love making piñatas, so she had a piñata, and that was, I think that's what really drew the children. But so that's one part. The other one is the comment about the churches, and it's already been a researched proof that, or at least it's temporary, that with refugees who come to Canada, the people who succeeded best in adapting to Canada, settling in and doing well, getting jobs, etc., were people that were supported by churches, because the churches they don't have any personal jealousies or concerns. They don't, they don't have the distance that the government has. So the people felt more truly just helped by the groups in the churches that help with that. Mm-hmm. And I think I see some of the same thing with older people, is that there's a lot of us at this particular church that I started going to after my husband passed away. And we're really all there for each other. So if somebody isn't there, we find out what's happened. Is she okay? Or is he all right? Do they need anything? And so we're always there for one another in a way that you just don't find anywhere else.
Wow.
And I guess that's about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jen. This was a nice recap. And talking about recap and book ending, I would like to invite Sara. So here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen in the next few minutes is that I'm going to invite Sara to give us a book ending or of this conversation, for what she learned, what kind of insights she has. And then we're going to close officially. I'll tell you what's going to happen next month. And then we're going to keep the conversation open for another 15 minutes informally. It's still going to be recorded, but anything that didn't get said before that can be said after that. So I'm going to pass it on now to Sara.
Thanks, Osnat. I am really loving reading the chat, which I didn't get a chance to do when I was speaking, and seeing everybody's contribution. It's a very rich chat, and I hope do you save the chat and
yes.
Send it out to people? Good, thanks. Wonderful points about where are the men? Wonderful points about the importance of intergenerational connections. I totally agree with all of that. I guess I'm learning too that solo aging and all of the ramifications of what I call family diaspora around the world have implications everywhere, not just in the US. I certainly knew that about India, because I have some contacts with people who are working in India in that regard. But other than that, nothing. So it's been a tremendous opportunity for me to understand how that's happening in various places around the world. It's intergenerational connections are going to be critically important because of the family, the kind of the dissolution of the whole family support system that I think people around the world have depended on. So anything that we can do to increase that kind of connection, I'm definitely in favor of. I noticed there was a point or two in the chat about the socioeconomic situation. I think, that's a really tough one, because here in the US, we are faced with a huge divide, and people that are on the lower socioeconomic side of that divide are going to be struggling mightily. They already are, and I don't foresee it getting much better. So the best things we can do are to fight for programs and services for people that don't have the money to pay for them, because somehow that just wasn't ever taken into account when these programs were developed for seniors 40, 50 years ago, many of them now. And people are living longer. People of all socioeconomic categories and strata are living longer, and we have to come together and make plans and help people on the low end of that divide, make some plans for themselves and have as good a ending of life as people on the other side of that divide have. So I think the more we can do for that, the better we will be as a society. I love the things that Jan Smith said about the importance of local community groups, because like it or not, as we age, we are going to be less able to be mobile, to get out and go places. I feel like I have to watch everything I say because of the ageism police. But honestly, age happens, and we are going to be less mobile. We are going to be less able to put things together in our minds than we have been in our younger days. And so the more local these organizations and these programs can become, the better, because people do want to stay close to home. I'd love to see more home sharing close to home so that people aren't isolated, so they're not alone. But there's just a lack of understanding there's a lack of ability in all of us to put ourselves into our 95-year-old bodies. Right now, we're in our 70-something bodies or our 80-something bodies, and it's hard. It's really hard to project ourselves into the future like that. The people who are best able to do it, I've found, are people that were intimate caregivers for their aging parents, and they really saw what the process is like. And I cannot count myself among them. I never took care of aging parents, but I'm observing now what is involved when my friends and some of my extended relatives are doing that. So yeah, the more we can do all around the world to help people to age comfortably and in a supportive way, especially people that don't have family to help them do that, I think is critical. So I think that's my bookend.
Thank you, Sarah. Much wisdom there. And this is the end of our formal part of the 50-50, and we're going to keep the session open for another 15 minutes for anything else that need to be said and want to be said. So here we are. Moira, maybe some reflection from you, if you have. This is so much about the rights of all the people, as far as I can see it, and what we fight for.
Well, I'd just like, 110% to endorse this whole idea of home sharing. I've been doing it now for the last 12 years, and I've I don't know how to say, but I've birthed nieces. I've got 5 or 6 wonderful young women who have become like my nieces. And in this last episode with my broken arm, the young Anya, who's a Spanish lady who's has been living at my place now for the last 3 years. She's just been wonderful. You can't imagine what you can't do when you break your arm. And it's just it's also my conception of intergenerational. I've always felt I don't have children. I always felt that I've had so much help from the generation above me, and I can't see on the screen right now, but I'm thinking specifically of Jan Hively, who's been just a wonderful and is a wonderful friend and mentor to me. And she helped me up. And if I go one generation below me, I'm more touch with that. So that's the way I see the intergenerational thing: a hand up and a hand up. And you know, we've all got to get together. And I think what Jan Smith was saying, is just so valuable. It's up to us. You know, we're an army of older people, and we can't sit back and just let people make us feel bad because of ageism. We have to do something about it, and just form the groups and go and show and start one by one, and it'll grow, because that's what people really want. There we go.
Say something, I'm already out. The only thing that I can say is that this is a very interesting topic. It will be good to do more research so that we can extend categories of this, the categories of the, what did you call them? The loan, the categories, the soul agers. Because, you know, at times you can stay with families within a family, but you find that they are ignoring, some of the families, they completely ignore older adults who are staying with them. So if we expand the categories, looking at the different context where this definition of this soul agers can be, because you are a soul ager even if you are among people who are completely ignoring you, and you are on your own every day. You are only see them when they give you food, but no one is talking to you. Because for me, having a relationship with other people is the major defining category of someone who should be outside this category of soul agers. So I think more studies, even comparative studies, so that we can come up with dynamism, the dynamics of this. Because, for example, when you look at Botswana and someone is telling you that, yes, you cannot be lonely or soul ager because you are using technology like phone, you ask yourself, in the rural areas, how many people, older adults, have phones? You find that none of them, they have phones. So really, for me, the physical presence and the relationship that we have with the people surrounding you is the most important thing that should be defining these soul agers. You can be a soul ager while you are still staying with people in the same environment. So that's my thinking, Moira. We'll look at that. Think about comparison. Compare the soul agers in Paris and soul agers in Botswana and see where the differences are.
Excellent idea. We'll get on to that.
Thank you, Moira. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Quickly. This is my companion.
Oh, hi.
Anya,
Hi, nice to meet you all.
Just had 45 people.
This is me. It's cold here. Don't mind me. A little bit cold here. I'm in Botswana. Okay, we'll talk about that, but we need that comparison study.
Yeah, thank you. I always look forward to these conversations. They're such a bright part of, my days, and I really appreciate all the insight that everybody gives, and thank you so much for that. What I wanted to add was, within the conversation of aging and, um, yeah, aging and what surrounds your environment and how you feel about aging and who your support system is, what you have for your support system. Uh, it's been something that has been very interesting for me to reflect on, especially considering I'm on the complete opposite end. I just started my first job. Uh, I, having graduated from college last year. So being in a space where I'm just now breaking out of my cocoon and hearing all the wonderful and lovely things that people have to say about um uh aging and maybe some struggles, some things that we're trying to work out. All of that has been unbelievable. I don't know if I could even express it in words just how insightful it's been, especially as a person who is younger, because uh it gives me it gives me hope, um uh of what might lie for me in the future. For example, I think about what you know, once I start to enter that demographic, maybe 2068, I'm thinking 2069, 2070, around there. Um, it makes me reflect a lot on that, right? How if you know everything the universe allows me to get to that point, uh, I'd really appreciate it. But it does make me reflect on it a lot, and I think it's so powerful. And I the more I think about it, the more I think it can be powerful for people who are younger and maybe starting on their journey of self-discovery and their place in the world. Hearing from people who are older than them, who are maybe wrestling with the same issues, maybe they've have come to terms with some answers that they can then impart, kind of a little bit of how Moira was talking about looking up for help and looking down to pass on the any advice that you have. And I think it's just wonderful. So I just wanted to add that and be transparent with how I was feeling. And yeah, I'm so happy to see so many of you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Well, we have, I think the last three commenters will be Jen, Adele, and Tom, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi. Just a very brief comment. I just wanted to say that at the end of this year of our aging group, there's a number of us who are looking at retirement places that we could all go to the same one. So we're investigating the various ones in our city and looking at, you know, which ones are suitable in one way or another. So that's another way that you can look to the future and keep your support system alive. And thank you all, everybody. I really appreciate everybody's comments.
Thank you, Jen. Adele?
Upstairs. I think that, Sarah, this was a very interesting topic, and you presented it very well. I think what I'm taking away from it, I thought about solo aging, but not in the context of myself, but in the context of my daughter, one of my daughters who does not have children. And I have how her life will unfold when I'm sorry, my husband's making funny faces at me here because he can only hear one side of the conversation. Thinking about it in terms of how she will manage and where her support will come from. I also have an older sister who has no children and from whom I wouldn't say I am estranged, but we do not have a close connection, and how she is coping with being older. But I think what I'm taking away from this, Sarah, is that I also have to think about myself and my plan for myself. Should I be a solo ager? So I thank you for that.
Tom?
Moira, thanks for your comments on home sharing. I have options for community living with CCRCs and so forth, but I know I'm aware of at least two organizations, one which grew out of Boston, but I think is based in New York, which matches college students with people who want someone to share their home. And there's another much older organization in Colorado, Silver something or other, that does the same. But in terms of doing such sharing, there are various reasons ranging from the pure economic to the social to whatever you have, to wanting to remain in your own home, which for many of us is a place that we love and don't want to give up. But how you go about that, and the fact that you've been so successful, you say for 12 years in sharing your home, I think a 50-50 program where maybe a few people, including yourself, would share some observations on how do you bring that about? Because that's not an easy challenge, how to create that match, find the individuals and so forth. I think that would be a very, very worthwhile topic. Thank you.
We'll see you again on the 12th of August. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here, sharing your thoughts, observations, insights. Thank you, Sarah, for bringing this topic alive. It looks like we all have a lot of work to do to continue advancing it and passing it on to those who will be here eventually too.
Yeah, thank you. And anyone who wants to get a hold of me, I put my information in the chat, and Moira and Osnat have it as well.
All right. Good night, good morning, good day to everybody. Thanks again for being here.